All right. Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. I don't know about anyone else. I know I feel a little disoriented thinking about this as the end of the first week and about this being a Friday and kind of this COVID-19 world. So I appreciate you all sticking with this. And I think the discussion has been really good online. I know it's different than an in-person discussion. I know some people have been pretty critical of some elements of Aloft and mostly in fair ways. I think that, we don't all have to agree on sort of liking this piece, but can nonetheless, recognize what is and is not successful, and specifically as it applies to our own aesthetics and what we might take from this novella. But I hope in reading this last leg of the project that people recognize some elements of this that, it answered some of our questions. I'm sure there are still some lingering kind of confusions. One point that came up in the previous discussion thread was about how it seems as though we're not having our questions answered. And again, I think this last 25 pages does answer some of our questions, but not all of them. And I would suggest that I mentioned this in one of my comments, but I realize probably not everyone's going to go back and read every comment, or you might just miss this one. But I think it does bring up a really good question as to do we need all of the answers, right? So as an example, I'm going to reference the film Groundhog Day, which it's old enough now that I don't know if all of you would have seen it. I imagine most people are familiar with the concept of it, at least. If you haven't seen it, I think it holds up reasonably well. I think it's a good movie. But I'm talking about the Bill Murray film from the early 90s. Where basically the concept is that he relives the same day over and over again. And, I hope not spoiling anything too significant here. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I think you can still watch the movie and enjoy it even with this knowledge. We never get a real explanation as to why this day was repeating or how he breaks the loop. People have theories about this that are, some of them taking some pretty big intuitive leaps, and some of them, based on some pretty fair interpretations of the material. But I would say the film doesn't give us any definitive answers by any stretch. And I think for some viewers that can be unsatisfying, because we spent this whole movie in this bizarre circumstance and we never even know why. But I think once we kind of surrender to this is just the circumstance, and hey, look what happened if this were the circumstance with this character, how he would change, what he would learn, what he would experience. I think there's more power to it in that. So again, we might not have completely full or satisfying answers about the nature of this ship that Aubrey lands on, why it's there, or what's ultimately happened to it, or what it's doing, or what it will do from this point forward. But I would argue that the journey that Aubrey goes through with it, and how it kind of speaks to his personal journey, that's where kind of the heart of the story is, at least in my reading of it. But we'll hash out some more of this in the discussion thread. But I just have about 3 or 4 places I want to take us in the text more specifically this time. So the first of them is on page 308, and this is the start of chapter 20 of the book here. So it reads, when Aubrey awoke almost 11 hours later, he knew something he should have understood months earlier. June had not told him he needed to move on from Harriet because she cared about him. June had told him to move on because she cared about Harriet, and Harriet was too sweet, or too lacking in assertiveness, take your pick, to tell Aubrey to get the fuck out of her life. Excuse my language, just quoting the text here. That was what Harriet had been getting at on the day of the reception. What else did you and June discuss? Harriet and June had maybe been only moments from breaking up their little goof of a folk act when he hijacked things that night in the Slithy Toves. He had made it all more serious than it had to be, and than they'd ever wanted it to be. The girls had made room for him in their lives, but only after he'd elbowed his way in and superimposed his own desires over their harmless fun. I think this is a really interesting revelation from Aubrey, and I think there's an argument to be made that maybe Aubrey's being a little too hard on himself here, but also an argument that maybe he's really finally seeing a clearer picture of what's actually going on. And as much as June could have been getting at that Aubrey was kind of selling himself short or putting himself in a damaging situation. Maybe he was actually kind of interfering in what these young women would have done without him, and complicating their lives in a meaningful way. So I think it's an interesting moment in the text, and I welcome all of your interpretations as well, as in terms of what's going on here, what we take from this, what we might make of the situation. So let's see. Let's get back to page 327 here. So this is the very end of chapter 24 here, where let's see. Okay, yeah. So I'll just read these. It's just these two short paragraphs here, as of chapter 24. Cal. That's what the guy's name. That was the guy's name. It popped into Aubrey's head all at once. Cool Cal, the one and only. How had he forgotten? He stopped spinning and fell toward the lush green earth below. If he weren't sure to die from the impact, he thought he might just about die from the glory of it all. Tears streamed from his eyes, and Aubrey Griffin began to smile. I'm just curious what we make of this moment. I think that there's a few ways we could interpret Aubrey suddenly remembering what Cal, who he'd previously referred to as Axe, what the guy's actual name was, and why this moment might be glorious. I'll put forward just as one piece of an interpretation that this is sort of a moment of returning to reality. He remembers, this real person's name from kind of, before this whole adventure with the cloud began. And there's sort of a suggestion that Aubrey is kind of moving on from this. He's experiencing glory. He's done something, arguably for the first time in the novella, that's actually heroic or at least courageous. And we get his full name. Aubrey Griffin began to smile, which we know who Aubrey is by this point. We don't need a full name introduction. I think Hill is making a choice there, and so what kind of sense we make of all that. But okay, and then the other place I want to go to, actually, I'm sorry, I'm skipping a little bit earlier now. I moved past this before. But this is in chapter 22. It starts on page 315. We get a look at the thing the cloud is protecting. And I want to go a little bit ahead of that to page 318. This is towards the end of that chapter. And read just the second to last paragraph here. So this again, 318, second to last paragraph. He felt not surprise, but only a kind of wary disappointment. A sentient and empathic life form made of smoke had come to this world, who knew how long ago, with a single purpose, to conceal and protect a head in a ball. A monstrous, silent thing that had maybe not even survived the voyage. And I think this is such an interesting moment. So this gets us a little bit more, as close as we're going to get, I think, to answers as to what this thing is that Aubrey is interacting with and sort of living on for most of the novella. And this idea that the thing inside it, kind of the thing that it's protecting, the most important piece of this thing, and Aubrey's realization that maybe it's dead. Maybe it's been gone this whole time, and this cloud is just kind of living on, despite having already lost, right? Despite no longer really having a purposeful mission, and there's no way of ending that mission now because there's nothing to call it off. And I think that we can very reasonably connect this to Aubrey, right? This idea that the idea of loving something that's already gone and living on in loneliness and sort of fear and trying to form connections and having all this anxiety about something when it's not even real in the first place. Again, we've talked about this in the discussion threads, but Aubrey's sort of obsession with Harriet, right? This idea that at this point in the novella, it's clear that it never really was a thing. Like she was never going to love him back. Maybe as a friend, right? I think we can argue that she legitimately cared about him in that way and that they were important to each other on that level. But she was never going to see him quite the way that he saw her. And I think on some level he knew that for quite some time, right? But this is him acknowledging the situation of like this cloud, like this ship protecting this thing that may or may not even be alive, may or may not serve any purpose anymore, but is still so obsessively committed to it and protecting it, right? And I think it's underscoring that Aubrey and this cloud are kind of one and the same in that way. And I think that's sort of the essence of the piece. That Aubrey sort of needed to be subjected to something like himself, or needed to be totally removed from his normal life situation on a more base level. To realize the situation, to get some perspective of it all, and to actually move on from it. And I think it's telling that when he lands back on Earth, he's going to call his mom, right? Because if I asked you, like 50 pages earlier and said, Aubrey is going to survive this situation, he's going to land back on Earth, I think most of us would guess the very first thing he's going to do is he's going to call or text Harriet, right? And he's going to try to connect with her again. But the fact is reaching out to his mom instead. I think many of us can relate to that, right? I think many of us have the kind of relationship, with one or both of our parents, or at least a family member or guardian, that's, the most important person to us, the first person we want to reassure that, no, I'm alive and okay. I didn't die in the skydiving accident. But we haven't been set up that way for Aubrey until this moment, until we get to the end. And so I think that it's worth just some meditation on kind of what that means and what that says about Aubrey. Some of which I've already kind of covered here, but nonetheless, we can hash that out a little bit more in the discussion thread. So again, I don't think this is a perfect novella. So I don't want to kind of project that, where I know that some folks in the thread have been pretty critical of this novella, and some folks have defended it to some extent. I think it's interesting. I think it has things to teach us. I think it has stuff that's kind of ripe for discussion about what this kind of speculative fiction does or can do in terms of taking us out of a familiar space, kind of applying concepts that we don't know from our normal everyday life, and providing that as a lens to think about things that are in our lives. So I think it's valuable in all those ways. But that said, I'm not going to stand here and say that I think it's a perfect novella. I think it's 100% perfectly executed. I'm on the fence personally about the whole bouncing back and forth between flashback structure. Overall, I land on the side of thinking that it worked, and it's interesting, and that's the story that Hill is really trying to tell us. I've read this thing, I think, 3 times now. And so I think on the first read, I was a little more underwhelmed with it. And I've liked it a little more every time that I've read it, especially in preparing to teach it in this class. But nonetheless, you can certainly have your own opinions, and that's totally fair game. So again, the discussion threads, by and large, they've been going really well. My intention is not long after posting this to do a little bit more thorough check and just kind of see. I've been keeping up with the discussion, responding to different people's comments, but doing more of a check just to make sure everyone is doing what they're expected, or making sure I'm catching folks who haven't quite been doing what I would expect, so I can reach out to you individually and make sure we're on the same page and know what to do thus far. But rest assured, for the majority of you, I think probably the overwhelming majority, you're doing great work there. I think the discussion thread has been going really well from my perspective. And the reading response journals I've been reading so far have been going well as well. I've had a few people message me individually about those and just asking for a little clarification about expectations for those journal responses. So just to clarify that a little bit, again, it's really wide open. Basically, I'm looking for evidence that you did the reading and that you have engaged with it in some way, and kind of thinking, and not just kind of regurgitating plot points, but thinking about what you think it means, or some specific element that caught your attention that maybe isn't even worth us getting into the discussion thread about, or is kind of beside the point of where the discussion has gone, but nonetheless that you just kind of want to meditate on for a paragraph or two. I give the loose guideline of it being a double-spaced half page to a page and a half. And I think that's kind of the ideal range that I would place you in, but even a little bit shorter. I care more about kind of quality of thought, and again, if you're really engaging with the material, than necessarily hitting a page length requirement for this part of the course. So I hope that all makes sense, but again, please keep in touch if you have questions. I will say over the weekend, I don't expect I'm going to be on the discussion threads very much. So that means Saturday and Sunday I might pop on just a little bit just to scan to see if there's big things going on, but for the most part I probably will not be there. So if you do have questions that are more urgent nature, as in like you need a response by Monday, especially if it's one of the assignments that's due on Monday or Tuesday, please send me an email. I will have a more active eye on my email. I won't be kind of checking it all the time, but I expect I will check it at least once a day on Saturday and Sunday and be able to respond to some messages there. So feel free to contact me individually if you do have questions. But to put a bow on all that and to set us up for next week. So for group-led discussion videos, again, the first one is going to be due on Monday. The second one is going to be due on Tuesday. And those are to focus on Aloft. And so again, thinking of questions you think this text introduces, and you can borrow from the discussion thread, and especially from your journal responses, that's all fair game. As long as you don't feel like we've already kind of hashed it out completely and kind of beaten it to death, consider it fair game to bring up as questions. But again, in this video format, I'm only leaving you 15 minutes or so of lecture about each of these parts of the reading. We could talk for much longer about these things. So feel free to delve into material that we just haven't gotten to yet, but see what you and your group mates can come up with there. But so again, as a reminder, for the group-led discussion videos, if you're going to upload it yourself to YouTube and just send me a link, please just try to have that to me by 11 a.m. on the day you have it due. If you're going to ask me to do more, as in you're just sharing a raw video file with me that you're going to need me to upload, or otherwise, a file that I need to do some processing of, please try to have it to me by 11 just to give some buffer time so I can get that ready to share with the class by around 11 o'clock that morning and more or less keep on schedule. Similar deal for the communal writing project. Please make sure you've uploaded those on your due date by 11 a.m. So if you're A1, B1, or C1, again, a reminder that your beginnings of these stories are due by Monday at 11 a.m. I know I have one of them already in. I have not opened it yet, but thank you for the student who was working ahead and got that done early. And have fun with these. Again, feel free to introduce some speculative elements, introduce some characters and settings. I'm really excited to see where this project goes as we continue it from student to student. And then as a last note, for Monday's class, I haven't 100% decided this yet, but I think this is the direction I'm leaning in, is that I will not record a video lecture for Monday's class, but rather I'll let the group-led discussion video and our 3 communal writing project assignments kind of lead the way and just post those for people to engage with in the discussion. I depending on what comes back, I might record a very short video just as kind of introduction and kind of transition between those materials, but mostly it's going to be the students' show for Monday. And with that, I'm saying we probably won't start talking about Rain, the next reading that we're getting into on Monday, but rather do please keep up with the reading. So we'll talk probably about parts 1 and 2 of Rain on Tuesday. And we'll kind of catch up there. And I think in some ways that might give us more to talk about and kind of be useful to us anyway. And then on Wednesday, we'll finish up, our main discussion of Rain, and then we'll get to the other group-led discussions for Thursday and Friday of next week, in addition to interspersing these communal writing project pieces. So I know there's a lot of moving pieces, a lot going on in this class, and it would be a little bit more intuitive to be transparent if we were all in person, but I hope it all makes sense. If you're feeling really confused about elements of this, though, please feel free to come in with questions either in the discussion thread or individually. Again, I think it's useful if you have kind of just big questions of things that you think no one could really understand at this point, or at least lend themselves to confusion. It might be useful to put them in the overall discussion thread. But I say that again with the caveat that I might not be on it a lot on Saturday and Sunday, and so if it's a more pressing question for something that you have due on Monday or Tuesday, you may want to either additionally or just instead email me or message me individually, and I can get you a response to make sure that you know what you need in order to complete your assignments. But overall, I hope you've enjoyed this first week of the class. Again, I know it's a little unusual for myself. This is the first time I've taught the full session or semester online. I had to make that transition in the spring with the pandemic when it really started taking off. It's different, but I know I've enjoyed so far getting to communicate with you all this way and getting to participate in the discussion threads and see the journal responses. From my perspective, we're off to a good start here, but please keep me posted again if you're not feeling the same or if you have significant questions. I am tentatively planning at some point towards the middle or later end of next week to do a live session either through WebEx or Zoom where I invite anyone who wants to come and just kind of have a more real-time discussion of some of what's going on in class and to talk about some questions that we haven't gotten to and to answer some logistical questions in real time for folks. So rest assured, I'm still thinking through the mechanics of the best way to handle that, but it is my intention to host one of those probably next week. And if it doesn't happen next week, then for completely sure, we'll do it in week 3. My objective, though, is to do one for week 2, one for week 3, and kind of see how those go and if there's kind of a demand and an enjoyment of those and carry on. But those will not be graded in terms of attendance or anything like that. They're purely for enrichment and an extra opportunity for us to engage for students who will find that useful, which I like those kinds of interactions, but I also know just scheduling wise, it might not work for everybody, which is why I'm not requiring it. But okay, I hope that's all clear enough. I've babbled on for long enough at the end of this video. So thanks again, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll touch base again on Monday.